Okay guys, quick review of the American Revolution and how it impacts Georgia. Causes of the American Revolution that specifically affect Georgia: the French and Indian War, the Proclamation of 1763, and the Stamp Act. There are lots of other tax acts that Great Britain demands, but that is the big one that impacts Georgia. Okay, so cause one, the French and Indian War. An ally, that's someone that's on your sides. So the two sides on this war, we have the French and some Native American tribes. They are allies. And on the other side are the British and the colonists. They are allies. Okay? They're fighting over the Ohio River Valley. That's this lighter yellow area right here. England wins, which is great. They gain control of Canada, Florida, and the Ohio River Valley, but this also leads to huge war debt for Great Britain. They've had to pay for weapons and bullets and soldiers and uniforms and food and so on and so forth, so they are now in debt. Their way to deal with this debt is to start taxing the colonists. The colonists do not like this. It's not fair in their opinion. One of the things, when we have to pay taxes as adults, at least we get to vote on the politicians that make those decisions for us, so we have some say in it at this point now in our country. They didn't back then. That made them very angry. Okay, so French and Indian War, if you remember back to the Charter of 1732, our border went all the way out, the western border went all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. Well, now because of the French and Indian War, it is shortened to the Mississippi River, which is right here. Okay. We next have the Proclamation of 1763. This is issued by King George. He issues it to the colonists. They cannot settle past the Proclamation train, which is right here, the Proclamation line, which is the Appalachian Mountain chain, right here. And the king wants the Native Americans to stay to the west of this line, while the colonists stay to the east of it. It also moves Georgia's southern border down here to the St. Mary's River. So that both the French and Indian War and the Proclamation of 1763 affect Georgia by changing the size and the borders of Georgia, but also where the colonists can live. They don't like this. Some of them had already moved out west past the Proclamation line. Now they have to move back, or if they were planning on going out there, they couldn't. So then we have the Stamp Act, cause number 3. This is the tax on written documents. Think about legal documents, newspapers, playing cards, the paper that you guys write on to take any kind of assessment, any kind of assignment that you do in class. If you had to pay a tax on that, think if you had to pay a tax on every text message that you sent or every Snapchat that you did. That's kind of what the Stamp Act was for them at that point. Georgia, remember, youngest colony, baby colony, they still have ties to Great Britain because they've only been over here for the shortest amount of time, so they still have family and relatives and people they're in contact with over in Great Britain, so they're the only ones to accept the Stamp Act because they do not want to upset the king. Okay, so after that, King George III issues more taxes. Sugar Act, tax on sugar products. Townshend Act, tea, glass, lead, and paint. So anything you want to build, there's more taxes on it. Colonists are getting very upset to the point this leads to the Boston Massacre and the Boston Tea Party, and those in turn lead to the Quartering Act. So the Boston Massacre is when colonists are aggravating the British troops there in Boston to the point where there's pushing, there's shoving, there's rocks being thrown at the soldiers, and they haul off and start shooting. 5 colonists end up dead. Okay, so we talked about this picture and how it was probably painted by a colonist because it gives you the perception that the British soldiers are the bad guys here. Okay, then in 1733, we have the Boston Tea Party. A bunch of fat old white dudes dress up and pretend to be Mohawk Indians and go to the ships in the Boston Harbor and dump 342 chests of tea into the Boston Harbor. There was so much tea in there that they turned the harbor brown. So you can imagine how upset the king was after this, because that was millions of dollars worth of tea. So the colonists are upset. They decide to meet, and they hold the First Continental Congress. Georgia does not send a representative. Youngest colony, afraid of upsetting the king, But then, by not participating, Georgia upsets the other colonies, and this is basically the illustration they're given. Join or die. If we don't do this together, we're not going to make it. Okay, so Georgia realizes we need to do this together. We need to join with the other colonies, and they get in on the fight. The Declaration of Independence. That is the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. The Declaration is written there. The main author is Thomas Jefferson. You need to know that it's divided into 3 sections. We've got the preamble that introduces it, the grievances, which is just another word for complaints, and then the third part where they actually declare independence, all the way down here where you can't see. And this is done on July 4th, 1776. Yes, that is why we shoot off fireworks every July 4th. The 3 men from Georgia that sign it, Hall, Gwinnett, and Walton. That is important. Those 3 men you need to know, Hall, Gwinnett, and Walton. After the Declaration of Independence, the Second Continental Congress creates an army because they know that they're going to have to fight. At this point, it is a war. They have angered the king. They have done a lot to upset him and make it clear that they are done being part of his domain, and it's time for war. Alright, so on one side, we have the British, the people from England. They also have the Redcoats, their army, and Loyalists. Those are colonists who live here in the colonies, but they're still loyal to the British Crown. And then on the other side, we have the Patriots. These are the colonists who want independence, and they are led by George Washington. Okay, so here in Georgia, there were both loyalists and patriots. So there's some fighting going on. Georgia's not in good shape, okay? The British are so angry at this point, they're just burning Georgia towns, murdering colonists, and our militia is not very strong. So morale, everybody's spirit and how they're feeling about things is at an all-time low. It's not looking good, okay? Then we have the Battle of Kettle Creek, February of 1779. And, it's not a huge in the grand scheme of the American Revolution, but for the colony of Georgia, it is huge because the rebel militia defeats over 800 British troops and any loyalist colonists here in Georgia that were fighting with them. They are able to get guns and horses that they need, and it lifts morale. People are starting to feel like, okay, there's a chance we could win this war, that the Patriots stand a chance to do this. We then have the Siege of Savannah. Epic fail. It is not good for the colonists at all. They are attempting to regain control of Savannah because shortly after the war starts, the British had taken control of Savannah. The colonists want it back. They try to go in and surprise them. The surprise doesn't work. They are getting shot down left and right. In only 45 minutes, 1,000 soldiers on the colonist side are dead. Okay, so epic fail. Savannah stays under British control. At the end of the Revolution, 5 years of fighting, they defeat the English. The French actually come and help us. We get our independence. Now we need to create a new nation and government. Okay, so we write a constitution. That is a written form of government that lays out all the expectations, all the processes that are going to be used to run our country. Okay, 3 branches, executive, legislative, and judicial. Our first constitution was the Articles of Confederation. It was bad. It was so focused on every state having their powers that there was not a central government to pull it together. So the states have too much power. There's no president, no court system. They can't collect taxes. They can't organize an army. Every state has a different money system, so how could they collect taxes? There's no national government to regulate the trade, and they can't pass laws without 9 of the states agreeing, so there's not many laws being passed. Weak. The Articles of Confederation was a weak document, and it did not work well. So they meet at the Constitutional Convention, and we have 2 men from Georgia that represent, and that is Few and Baldwin. Don't worry about that. Just know that there's 2. Okay. In the U.S. Constitution, we have 3 branches of government. established: executive, legislative, and judicial. We have a bicameral legislature, meaning two houses. We have the Senate and we have the House of Representatives. They approve a method of amending or making changes to the Constitution. Those are amendments. They knew back then that they didn't know everything, that things would change, and they needed a way to make sure that this document could keep evolving as our country evolved. And that was why they created amendments. Then they went ahead and did the first 10 amendments, which are named the Bill of Rights. Okay, you guys know the first: freedom of religion, speech, press, assembly, and right to petition the government. Alright, there's also 2 major rules that are established for America. 1, separation of powers. This divides the powers and duties of a government into different branches. We've got the executive branch has certain powers, the judicial branch has certain powers, and the legislative branch has certain powers. Okay, they don't all do the same thing, they all do their jobs. That way nobody has too much power. In conjunction with that, we have checks and balances. So each branch can check and balance out the other branches. So nobody gets too much power. Nobody can do whatever they want, because there's always a check that another branch can do. Okay, so there's your quick review on the American Revolution as it impacts Georgia.